At Fide.email, we believe in protecting your privacy and supporting your faith. Fide.email offers peace of mind with features like end-to-end encryption and secure communications tools. Your data stays private and your values remain intact. Choose an email provider that understands what matters to you. Make the switch to Fide.email today. An interesting story broke in the European press about the church in America, and it touches on that migration story that is, or was, dominating the church news. And certainly that story will be back. I guarantee you that story will be back. There's no way that's going away, even if Francis's health issues have done a masterful job of sweeping that away from the public discourse. The U.S. bishops make a number of contentious claims that by welcoming these illicit migrants to the U.S., we are living the gospel message about welcoming the visitor and all the rest. And moreover, we're making America more Catholic by bringing in people who are Catholics. They've said this. I've heard them say it myself. But it's not actually true, nor is it living the gospel message anyway for a number of reasons, though we are to be sure to help migrants in need and the rest. But one reason that all the stuff they're saying, their excuses for this, are not true is that the church has done a terrible job of keeping Catholics in Central and South America from joining heretical, schismatic, pseudo-Christian groups like the Pentecostals or Presbyterian groups. Moreover, we know that when they do come to the U.S. and start to live in this increasingly godless country that the bishops don't really do much to try to stem the tide of, they're twiddling their thumbs and saying a couple of things of how sad it is that people don't go to church anymore, but they don't really do anything about it. These migrants then leave the faith if they had had it when they first arrived, often joining those heretical schismatic groups or just becoming secularists and atheists. And now we have data to back this up. A couple days ago, I told you about a new report from Pew Research about religiosity in America. Go to Info Catholica for this headline. Catholicism loses ground among Hispanics in the United States, under their faith in crisis section. It's really sad that a Catholic news outlet has to have this. What's even more sad is this is the only place I have found this article. Didn't see it on any American Catholic news sites. Didn't see this on any Canadian Catholic news sites. Didn't see this on any English-speaking Catholic news sites. I found this in Info Catholica, which is, I believe, in Spain. Again, apologies for any syntax issues here. We are using a translation extension on Google Chrome to make this thing readable. But as many of us have pointed out just anecdotally, we see that they arrive, they get acclimated a little bit to the environment, and then they leave Catholicism for some heretical schismatic group or just secularism in general. And an argument to make with the bishops about why they need to actually embrace everything the new administration is doing is that it's better for the salvation of the souls of the people they're trying to bring in here in the first place that they're not permitted in. Because if they are permitted in, they're more likely to leave the faith and their soul be lost. From the article, quote, a recent study on religion in the United States shows that while the percentage of white, black, and Asian adults who identify as Catholic has remained relatively stable since 2007, the percentage of Hispanic adults who identify as Catholic has decreased dramatically. The Pew Research Center's 2023-24 Religious Landscape Study found that between 2007 and 2023-24, the percentage of white adults in the United States who identify as Catholic has fallen from 22 to 17%, the percentage of black adults from 5% to 4%, and the percentage of Asian adults from 17 to 14%. Meanwhile, the percentage of Hispanic adults who identify as Catholic has fallen from 58 to 42%. The percentage of Catholics in the U.S. Hispanic population has been declining rapidly for a long time, said Gregory A. Smith, Senior Associate Director of Research at Pew, who has led studies on religion and American life. There was a time when we first did the Religious Landscape Study when we could say that we were partners headed toward a future where the Catholic population in the United States would be majority Hispanic, even though most Hispanics in the country would not be Catholic. But we are not at the point now where most Catholics are Hispanic. We are at the point where most Hispanics are not Catholic. And we have been there for some time now, he told Crux. Crux is an American news outlet talking about the Pew Research Survey, but they're not widely read in America because they are a bishop's outlet out of Boston. Think about that for a moment. They're more in a more official America magazine, basically. And as a consequence of that, they're not read nearly as widely as America magazine. For context, 36% of Catholics in the United States are Hispanic. It's not surprising to see those numbers. Hoffman Ospino, professor of Hispanic ministry and religious education at Boston College, told Crux, the larger the Hispanic population is, and the larger the portion that is born and raised in the United States, the more decline we will continue to see. He explained that we are no longer in the 1990s when more than half of the Hispanic population in the United States were immigrants who were likely to be religious. According to Pew study, 58% of immigrants in the United States are Christians. Today, about 64% of Hispanics were born and raised in the United States. He said he expects that number to continue to grow, meaning more Hispanics will be born into a pluralistic, secularized culture and therefore will not be Catholic. End quote. We have the data. They leave the church. Why do you think that is? It's the same reason that everybody else leaves the church. They leave because the church in America, specifically the bishops and many of their priests, don't preach the gospel. They preach the new synodal religion. They preach group hugs and kumbaya and inclusivity and recycling and being nice to people. But they don't preach the gospel. But all this gets worse. You see, those who want to stay Catholic leave because the church in America isn't doing anything to keep them in the church. It should sound familiar to you. It's the experience of Catholics of all demographic groups in America. They leave, again, I'm going to repeat myself here, they leave because the U.S. bishops and their priests are preoccupied with other things besides the gospel. So they leave. They leave to join heretical, schismatic groups that up until 40 years ago wouldn't have even been considered Christian by serious Christians. That is what they do. Back to the article here. Wrong one. Go back to the article from Info Catholica. More details. Another factor, according to Ospino, is the responsibility of the church itself. He noted that Hispanics are turning away from the faith in the U.S. in large part because, quote, much of our pastoral outreach is inadequate, meaning the second generation, those born in the country, are left unserved. Most of the efforts in Hispanic ministry in the United States are directed at the immigrant population. Masses in Spanish, sacraments in Spanish, social services for the immigrant community. All that is very important and very necessary. However, we have not found a way to accompany those 2/3 of Latinos who were born and raised in the United States. Many pastoral leaders assume that they will live their faith like their immigrant parents, grandparents, or siblings, or that they become Americanized to simply integrate into the white English-speaking Catholic community. The truth is that neither of those things are happening. We need better ways to reach out to this community. To make progress in this area, he said the church needs to focus at the local level, with parishes providing better support to young people and families. At the national level, he noted that fewer, quote, global pastoral plans are needed and more plans that strengthen local efforts such as apostolic movements, parishes, catechesis, and family ministry, end quote. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's the same problem everybody's facing. You know what would actually help keep people? If you reminded the young men, because women tend to leave the faith less than men do. If you reminded young men that the most masculine thing you can possibly do in life is to submit to Jesus Christ, submit to the teachings of his church, and not embrace the values of the world that tell you that masculinity is a bad thing. That's what you would do. Right-ordered masculinity. And then have, from the ambo, your priest and your bishops teach the faith, including the 4 last things, the consequences of sin, why you should not get too wrapped up in the broader culture. All those things that are actually part of the faith, instead of this new false gospel of inclusivity and all the rest of this nonsense. But they won't do that. They're allergic to it. They preach a false gospel. Many of them do, out of fear of losing Caesar's dirty money, out of fear of offending people. The gospel is offensive to many people. And our forebears in the Counter-Reformation knew that. That didn't stop them. Our forebears among the Jesuits in the 18th century, in the 17th century, knew that. When they came to North America, they knew that the locals would not like what they heard in many cases, and that they would pay a very steep price for preaching the gospel. But they did it anyway because they cared about their souls. They cared about their final destination. They cared about their salvation. Many of them recognized that their own salvation was linked to the salvation of the souls of others, and that fueled their ministry. Why don't our bishops today make that same realization? The Catholic Church didn't actually embrace liberation theology. The Catholic Church just did a very bad job of combating it. What should have happened was, when this stuff started emerging in the 50s and the 60s, was an unequivocal condemnation of it with excommunication. That didn't really happen. Instead, they started trying to meet them halfway. That's why Catholic social teaching after Vatican II was broken. It's because they tried to meet them halfway with it. Curious, do people believe, what do people think about this in the comments? Are you that surprised to see that new arrivals come in, many of them Catholic, and then they leave, or the kids leave? I would posit that it's actually the parish environment. And it's actually the sort of this sort of Tower of Babel in reverse that we've seen, where instead of everybody unified in the city of God under the liturgical language of Latin in the West through the traditional forms of the Mass, instead now we've essentially separated people into their own language groups, making it so they have no connection to other Catholics other than based on ethnicity. That's one part of it. It's absolutely part of it. The Cathos and Theos was one prior to the schism. Modern Christians, after Luther, Bible quarters missed the wisdom and grace of the Bible. I mean, a lot of Protestants have never read the Bible fully. And that's obvious when you argue with them. They've read like 40, 50 verses and then they memorize them to try to gotcha on people. But it's clear that sola scriptura is on its face nonsensical. All right, folks. Miriam, thanks very much for the question. How's your family doing? Praying for them. We're fine. We're just having a stormy night here. So, it turned out to be nothing, thankfully. All right, folks. I'm just curious what you have to say about all this in the comments, please. It does not surprise me that one bit that we see with all this happening, people leave the church. It doesn't really surprise me that when you see the church publicly taking the wrong side on this issue, and that you see the culture itself, which is increasingly atheistic, godless, having this effect on people. It doesn't surprise me. But I'm curious what you have to say. So let me know in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. Sharing this on social media helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.